There is a particular kind of silence that only happens when something irreversible occurs in front of witnesses. Not the polite silence of a room waiting for music to begin. Not the comfortable silence of a crowd lost in their own conversations. This was the silence of 200 wolves holding their breath at the same moment, because something had just happened that none of them had words for. A king had spoken. He had raised his voice in front of every alpha, every elder, every noble family in the Northern Territory, and he had done what no one in living memory had ever done at a grand harvest ceremony. He had rejected his fated mate, and she had looked at him, steady, clear-eyed, without a single tremor in her voice, and said 2 words that brought Richmond Hall to a complete and utter standstill. "I accept." She turned. She walked toward the exit. The crowd parted before her like water moving around stone. The great oak doors opened, the cold night air rushed in, and Sabrina Mills walked out into the dark without looking back once. The doors closed, and then Alpha King Marmon Richmond, the most feared and powerful ruler the Northern Pacts had known in 3 generations, staggered. He gripped his chest. His face went the color of ash. A sound began somewhere deep in his throat. Not a word, not a command, but something raw and animal and broken that shook the crystal chandeliers above the assembled nobility and made every wolf in the room instinctively step back. His beta, Bess Voss, moved toward him carefully, the way you approach something wounded that still has teeth. The king had rejected his fated mate to protect his crown. What he had not anticipated, what no one had warned him, was what it would feel like when she accepted it. This is the story of Sabrina Mills, the girl the pack called Invisible, the daughter they whispered about behind champagne flutes and practiced smiles, the woman who walked out of that hall with nothing but her mother's ivory dress and the cold, quiet certainty that she was done being small. And this is the story of what she built in the silence. After. The mirror in Sabrina's rented room had a crack running through the lower left corner. She had lived with it for 3 years, and she had stopped noticing it the same way she had stopped noticing a lot of things. The draft under the front door, the way the floorboards groaned in the hallway at night, at the particular loneliness of eating dinner with only the sound of the wind for company. She stood in front of that cracked mirror on the night of the grand harvest ceremony and fastened the last pearl button on the back of her mother's ivory dress, working by feel because she couldn't quite reach. Her hands were steady. She noticed that, and she was quietly proud of it. The dress was several years old. The fabric at the hem had softened from ivory to something closer to cream, and one of the pearl buttons caught the light slightly differently from the others because it was a replacement. She had sewn it on herself after the original fell behind the washing machine and was never recovered. It was elegant in the way that old, well-made things are elegant. It was not new. It was not fashionable. But in a hall full of women wearing gowns that had been commissioned specifically for tonight, it would mark her immediately. She had known that when she put it on. She had put it on anyway. It had been her mother's. That was enough. On the windowsill, propped against the glass where she could see it while she got ready, was a handwritten note from Leah Finch. "Don't let them make you small tonight. You're the tallest person I know, even in flat shoes. Come back in one piece. I'll have tea ready." Sabrina had read it 3 times. She read it once more now, and something in her chest settled. Not the ache, which was always there, but something above it. Something steadier. She picked up her coat, turned off the lamp and closed the door behind her. Richmond Hall sat at the top of a long private road that wound up through the northern pines like a thread being pulled. Sabrina had driven it in her second-hand sedan, following a line of motorcades and private vehicles, the gap between her rusted bumper and the gleaming black car ahead of her, a very precise illustration of where she stood in the pack's social order. She parked in the overflow lot, away from the valets. She walked to the entrance alone. The hall was everything she had known it would be, and everything she had hoped, somewhere foolish inside herself, that it wouldn't be. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like captured starlight, throwing gold across 200 wolves in their finest. The air was thick with competing perfumes. The warm animal pressure of too many powerful people in one room, and underneath it all, the deep, wordless biological hum of the pack hierarchy, doing what it always did. Sorting, ranking, reminding everyone exactly where they stood. Sabrina found her corner. She found the drinks table. She picked up a glass of elderflower water she had no intention of drinking, and positioned herself where she could see the room without being the first thing anyone's eye landed on. She had spent most of her life getting good at this. She was 3 years out of the pack's main social circuit, which was a polite way of saying she had been effectively removed from it. Her father, Isaac Mills, had been a pack healer, respected, well-liked, trusted, with the kind of quiet knowledge that keeps communities alive. Then he had been accused of selling pack medical records to the Eastern Rogues, stripped of his rank and exiled. He had died in exile 2 years later, according to the official report. Or at least, that was what the official report said. Sabrina had spent the first year after his exile trying to clear his name. She had spent the second year learning that trying to clear the name of a man the council wanted, disgraced, was a reliable way to make yourself a target. She had spent the third year being quiet, being invisible, and being a herbalist on the edge of the territory where the pack's social ecosystem mostly left her alone. She had not been invited to the grand harvest ceremony. She had been legally summoned to it. There was a difference, and everyone in the room was aware of it. She shouldn't be here. The voice came from her left, bright and carrying, designed to be overheard. Kerry Doolin, daughter of the Southern Alpha, was standing with 2 women whose names Sabrina knew, but whose faces she had long since stopped distinguishing. Kerry wore copper-coloured satin. She held her champagne glass the way people hold weapons, lightly, casually, ready. Her father disgraced the pack. They only let her in because of the old attendance treaty. "Poor thing," said the woman on Kerry's right, in the tone of voice that means the opposite. Sabrina did not look at them. She took a very small, very controlled breath. She thought about Leah's note. She thought about the steadiness of her own hands in the cracked mirror. She was here because the law required it. She would survive the night and go home, and that would be the end of it. Then the trumpet sounded. The double doors at the top of the grand staircase opened, and the herald's voice rang through the hall with the particular authority of someone whose entire professional existence is built around making people pay attention. His Majesty, Alpha King Marmon Richmond. The room didn't just quiet, it restructured itself. 200 wolves doing the same involuntary thing at the same moment, shoulders pulling back, chins lifting, the ancient animal part of every brain registering the hierarchy at the top of those stairs and responding accordingly. Sabrina kept her eyes down. She was very good at keeping her eyes down. She kept them down right up until the moment that something changed in the air. A shift in atmospheric pressure, subtle as a barometric reading, but unmistakable to the wolf underneath her skin, and her eyes went up without her permission. He was at the bottom of the stairs by then, tall, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired and precise in the way that truly powerful people are precise, as though the world arranges itself slightly to accommodate them without anyone deciding that it should. His eyes were dark amber, and they moved across the crowd with the efficient authority of someone conducting a survey rather than a social performance. She had seen him before, at a distance, never this close. Never with the pack bond, humming at full volume in a room with this much energy in it. Her wolf, who had been quiet and folded and mostly cooperative for her entire adult life, lifted her head. Mate. Sabrina felt it like a key, turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. A pull, low and certain, with roots going somewhere deep. No, she thought. Not tonight. Not here. Not him. But her wolf was not consulting her. At across 200 people, past Kerry Doolin, who had materialized at the edge of the crowd with a practiced smile and a perfectly positioned collarbone, past the daughters of 3 alpha houses who had spent considerable resources preparing for exactly this moment. Marmon Richmond's gaze moved and stopped, and found the ivory dress in the far corner. The crowd went still in that particular way that crowds go still when something unexpected is happening that they don't want to miss. He walked toward her. The crowd parted. Kerry's smile went rigid. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that Sabrina could feel the warmth radiating off him, could smell the wood smoke and cold iron and something underneath it. Something painfully, simply warm. And for one suspended moment, she saw it. His face, before the decision, before the wall. Something unguarded, something that looked almost like relief, like a man who has been looking for something for a long time and has just, unexpectedly, found it. She felt her breath go shallow, her wolf pressed forward, aching. Then it was gone. A shutter came down behind his eyes. His jaw tightened. He drew himself up to his full height, and when he looked at her again, he was the king. Only the king. Whatever else he had been for that single unguarded moment had been locked away somewhere she couldn't reach. Sabrina Mills, he said. His voice was low and even. It was also loud enough in that perfect silence to reach the back wall. Your Majesty, she whispered. She sank into a curtsy. Look at me, he said. She looked up. The bond hummed between them like a plucked string, alive, insistent, absolutely certain of itself. She watched his jaw tighten further. She watched him make a decision, and her heart, which had been doing something treacherous and hopeful in her chest for the last 60 seconds, began to understand what kind of decision it was. The Alpha King of the Northern Packs raised his voice in front of 200 witnesses, and what he said had the clean, deliberate architecture of something that had been prepared in advance. The crown of the Northern Packs requires a queen of noble standing. His voice filled the hall without effort, the way water fills the shape of whatever holds it. A queen of political weight, of clean lineage, of standing within the pack hierarchy that can anchor the throne through difficult seasons. Sabrina stood very still. The bond was still humming. She thought, distantly, that it was going to make what came next considerably worse. You are the daughter of a disgraced man, Marmon continued. His eyes were on her face, but his voice was aimed at the room. You carry no rank, no alliance, no political value that can serve the Northern Packs in the years ahead. From somewhere to her left, she heard Kerry Doolin make a small sound that was technically not a laugh. Technically. I cannot afford weakness. His voice dropped slightly. Only slightly. But in that silence, everyone heard it anyway. Not with the Eastern Packs testing our borders. Not with the Council watching every decision I make. Not now. He straightened. His face was a mask, a very good mask. But she had seen behind it 30 seconds ago, and she knew what it was covering. I, Marmon Richmond, Alpha King of the Northern Packs, he paused. One breath. Reject you, Sabrina Mills, as my fated mate and queen. The pain arrived. It was not metaphorical. It was not the clean, contained ache of ordinary heartbreak. It was biological, a tearing sensation in her chest, as though something that had just begun to take root had been pulled free with both hands. Her wolf made a sound deep inside her that she had never heard before, and hoped never to hear again. The bond, which had existed for barely 3 minutes, began to die, and dying hurt in ways she had not been warned about. Her eyes filled. She felt it happen and could not stop it. The room leaned in. 200 wolves with their breath held, waiting for the collapse, waiting for the begging, the pleading, the breakdown that would confirm everything they already believed about the girl in the second-hand dress from the disgraced family. De Keridulin had her sympathetic expression ready. The women beside her had their heads tilted at precisely the right angle. They were all waiting for Sabrina Mills to fall apart. She took one breath. Then she looked at Marmon Richmond, truly looked, past the mask and the title and the performance of certainty, and she saw what was underneath it. He was afraid, not of her weakness, of her, of what the bond had felt like for those 30 seconds before he shut it down, of the specific, destabilizing feeling of encountering something that could not be commanded or outranked or controlled. He had made this decision not from strength, but from the panicked certainty of a man who realized he was standing on ground that shifted under his feet, and he had chosen the cruelty of rejection over the vulnerability of standing still. That he was a coward wearing a crown. She understood it. She did not excuse it, but she understood it, and that understanding did something unexpected to the grief in her chest. It did not make the grief smaller. It made it colder. It made it purposeful. Her spine straightened. Not a performance, a decision. Her chin lifted. Not for the room, for herself. "I understand, Your Majesty," she said. Her voice did not shake. She would think about that later. How extraordinary it was that her voice did not shake. The room reacted with the specific, collective confusion of people who have been given the wrong script. A murmur moved through the crowd. Keridulin's practiced expression developed a small crack. Marmon blinked. It was almost imperceptible. She caught it. Sabrina took a small breath and spoke clearly. "You need a queen who is a symbol, a political instrument, someone who can sit beside the throne and reflect the power you already have." She paused. "You do not need someone who sees the man beneath the crown. I understand that, and I will not spend a single moment begging you to want something different." The silence was absolute. She looked at him one last time, at the warmth she had seen and he had buried, at the fear he was performing as resolve, and she made her choice. "I, Sabrina Mills, accept your rejection." Snap. Not a metaphor, an audible sound, a psychic severance that every wolf in the hall felt in the same moment, like a string pulled too tight, finally giving way. The bond, 3 minutes old and already dying, was cut clean. Gone. Sabrina turned. She walked toward the exit. The crowd divided before her as though they had rehearsed it, stepping back, decreating a path because some part of each of them recognized, without being able to name it, that they were watching something that required a clear lane. She reached the great oak doors. A young wolf she didn't recognize pulled them open. The winter air came in, cold and clean and indifferent. She walked out. She did not look back. Not once. Behind her, she heard the sound begin. It started low. Too low for human ears, but she was not human, and the bond was not entirely gone yet, only severed. And what she heard in that low sound was not the rage of a king whose authority had been questioned. It was the grief of a man who had just understood, too late, exactly what he had thrown away. The doors closed. The valet lot was empty at this hour. Sabrina reached her car, put her hands on the roof. and stood there for a moment with the cold metal under her palms and the sound of the winter wind in the pines above. She allowed herself 30 seconds. She counted them. She was precise about it. She let the grief move through her like weather, fast and total and not argued with. Her shoulders shook once, her eyes burned. Her wolf curled into herself somewhere deep and went very, very quiet. 30 seconds. Then Sabrina Mills straightened, opened the car door, and got in. She started the engine. She pulled out of the lot. She did not look in the rear-view mirror at the lights of Richmond Hall growing smaller. From somewhere very far away, at the edge of her mind, she felt the ghost of the Bond flicker, a sensation like a hand reaching through a wall, finding nothing to hold. She built a wall and kept driving. But back inside Richmond Hall, the grand harvest ceremony was no longer a ceremony. Marmon Richmond was on his knees on the marble floor. The crack had appeared beneath him before anyone understood what was happening. The marble splitting in a thin, branching pattern outward from where he knelt, as though the stone itself couldn't bear the weight of what was pouring out of him. Bess Voss, his beta, stood 3 feet away, with the careful stillness of someone who understood that getting closer right now would be dangerous. "Your Majesty?" Bess's voice was quiet and steady. "The guests. Get them out," Marmon said. His voice was almost unrecognizable, low and fractured and wrong in the way that only happens when something fundamental has broken. "Sir, get them out." Bess turned to the room and gave the evacuation signal. But the nobles moved, some quickly, some slowly, with their heads turned to catch every detail they could, toward the exits. Kerry Doolin did not move immediately. She stood at the edge of the cleared space around the king, her copper satin untouched, her expression doing the thing it did when she was calculating rather than performing. "Marmon," she said, stepping forward. Her voice was warm and carefully arranged. "It's all right. She wasn't worthy. You made the right choice for the pack. For all of us." Marmon's head turned toward her. His eyes had gone from amber to something darker. Not quite black, not quite gold, the color of something that has been burning long enough to change. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The energy that radiated off him in that moment made Kerry Doolin take one involuntary step backward before she could stop herself. "I suggest you go," Bess said to her, firmly and finally. Kerry went. Marmon stayed on his knees on the cracked marble, alone now except for his beta, and reached for the bond he had just severed. He reached for the thread that should have been there, the thread that had been there, warm and real and more certain than anything he had felt in years, for exactly 3 minutes at the beginning of the evening. He found nothing. No thread, no warmth, no resistance, not even the resistance of something pulled taut. Just silence. The specific, ringing silence of an absence where a presence had been. She had meant it. She had accepted it completely, and she had meant it, and she had closed the door. And standing outside that closed door, Marmon Richmond understood something about himself that he would spend the next 6 months trying to outrun. He had rejected her to save his kingdom from weakness. He had just discovered that the weakness was his. The mountain road back to the edge of the territory was dark and empty at this hour. Sabrina drove it carefully, both hands on the wheel, her headlights cutting a narrow path through the trees. The pack bond was fluctuating. It was not supposed to do that after a rejection. The bond was severed. That was the point. That was what the acceptance had accomplished. But there were scar tissues in these things, nerve endings that took longer to quiet, and through those remnant threads, she could feel the disturbance radiating outward from Richmond Hall, like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Marmon was in pain. She knew it the way you know the temperature of a room you've just left. Not because you're still in it, but because your skin remembers. The feeling that came through was not words, not images, just weather. A storm contained in one chest, pressing against its own walls. She took the turn toward the cottage and focused on the road. Her small home appeared in the headlights as she came around the last bend, a low stone building with a thatched roof and a single lamp burning in the window, which she had left on before she went out, because coming home to darkness had always felt like a specific kind of defeat. The herb garden along the front wall was bare in the winter, at the stakes sticking up through the frost like thin fingers. She cut the engine and sat for a moment. Then she went inside. The cottage smelled of dried lavender and wood smoke, and the particular quiet of a space that holds only one person's life. Books stacked on the windowsills, bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, a photograph on the mantel, face down, her father, which she had turned over 18 months ago and had not yet found the resolve to turn back. She turned it over now. She looked at his face for a long moment. Isaac Mills, in a photograph taken at a summer pack, gathering before everything happened, laughing at something off camera, strong and warm and entirely, completely himself. "I don't know where you are," she said quietly to the photograph, "but I hope it doesn't hurt." Then she went to the bedroom and pulled her travel bag from under the bed. She was not panicking. Panic was a luxury she had never been able to afford. She was thinking clearly, which was what she did when things went wrong. She got very quiet inside, and she thought clearly, and she moved. A rejected mate without pack protection was vulnerable in specific and practical ways. The noble families who had watched tonight's events would spend the next 48 hours assessing what Sabrina's continued existence in the territory meant for their interests. Kerry Doolin's family in particular would not enjoy the idea of a rejected mate of the king living on the edge of the territory, however quietly. Loose ends made people nervous. She needed to go. She was 3 sweaters deep into the bag when she heard the click, for it was the specific sound of a safety mechanism disengaging, small, precise, and entirely out of place in her cottage at 11:30 at night. Sabrina stopped moving. "Going somewhere, Miss Mills?" The voice came from the armchair in the corner of her bedroom, the dark corner, beside the bookshelf, where the lamplight didn't quite reach. Calm voice. Older. A quality to it that suggested a man who had stopped being nervous in dangerous situations a very long time ago. She turned slowly. Her wolf was up and alert, but not sounding an alarm. Threat assessment, not panic. The man in the armchair was older, late 50s, silver-streaked hair, a dark suit that had no business being in a cottage on the edge of pack territory. The gun resting on his knee was pointed at the floor. Not at her. A statement. Not an attack. "I don't know you," or Sabrina said. "No," the man agreed. "But I know your father." He reached into his breast pocket with his free hand and produced a business card, which he set on the edge of the dresser with 2 fingers. She crossed to it and picked it up without taking her eyes off him for long. Ephraim Turlow. Private counsel. "My father is dead," she said. "Your father," Ephraim Turlow said, with the measured patience of a man who has delivered difficult information before, "is very much alive, and he has been waiting for tonight for 4 years." The room tilted. Sabrina sat down on the edge of the bed. Not because she chose to, because her legs made the decision independently. "That is not possible," she said. "I saw the exile order. I saw the report from the Border Council. You saw what they needed you to see." Ephraim stood, tucked the gun into his jacket with the practiced ease of long habit, and moved to the window. He looked out through the curtain. The exile was real. The death was arranged. A body double. Blood magic. A volunteer from your father's network, who had already received a terminal diagnosis. The burial was genuine enough to satisfy the Council's verification process. Why? It was not a question. It was a demand. Because the people who framed your father knew the evidence he had collected. They needed him to disappear. But they also needed to ensure that the evidence disappeared with him, which meant eliminating anyone he might have passed it to. Ephraim turned from the window. His expression was not unkind. You were 16, Sabrina. Your father made a choice. She was quiet for a long moment. The photograph on the mantel was still face up. Isaac Mills, laughing at something off camera. He left me, she said. The words were flat, stripped of everything except accuracy. He hid you, Ephraim said. There is a difference, though I understand if it doesn't feel like one. A sound reached them from outside, distant but unmistakable to wolf ears. Engines. More than one. Ephraim moved toward the bedroom door with sudden efficiency. Dermin Cross's enforcer unit. They were sent to retrieve you. Officially. Unofficially, Kerry Doolin has friends in the Enforcer Guard, and she would prefer the evening's most inconvenient witness not make it to the border. He looked at her with calm urgency. We have approximately 4 minutes. There is a car at the back of the property. Sabrina stood up. She looked at her half-packed bag, at the herbs on the ceiling, what at her mother's ivory dress hanging on the back of the door where she had put it when she changed into her coat and jeans. She picked up the photograph from the mantel and put it in her coat pocket. 4 minutes, she said. Then talk fast while you drive. Ephraim Turlow drove the way people drive when they have done urgent things in vehicles before, precisely, without wasted movement, with a particular quality of attention that meant every mirror was checked and every sound accounted for. The car was a dark-coloured sedan, unremarkable, which was clearly the point. He talked while he drove. Her father, Isaac Mills, had been a pack healer with a secondary specialty that very few people had known about, archival research, specifically into the historical financial records of the Northern Pack Council. 3 years before his exile, he had discovered an anomaly, a pattern of payments, disguised as administrative costs, filtered through several intermediary accounts, flowing out of the Northern Pack treasury and into private holdings connected to the Haskins family. The Eastern Pack border incidents that had been blamed on rogue aggression were not organic. They had been manufactured. Payments to specific individuals to stage incidents, to generate pressure, to create the kind of sustained crisis that would make the Northern Council feel that they needed a particular kind of alliance, namely, a political marriage between the king and a Haskins daughter, to survive. It had been running for years. The Haskins family's influence in the Northern Council was so deeply woven through its structure that challenging it directly was the same as setting fire to the building you were standing in. Isaac Mills had found the thread. He had pulled it, and he had been stripped of his rank and exiled before he could pull it any further. He has spent 4 years, Ephraim said, taking a turn onto the highway with smooth efficiency, building something that can pull it from the outside. Sabrina looked out at the dark road. What kind of something? The kind that takes 4 years to build. Ephraim glanced at her. He would like to tell you the rest himself. Behind them, in the distance, she could see headlights. She watched them for a moment. The Enforcer unit, she said. Yes. How far to the border? 12 minutes at this speed, 8 if necessary. But she faced forward. Make it 8. The Blackwood Bridge, the great suspension crossing that marked the boundary between Pack territory and the human world, appeared ahead of them with its lights strung along the cables, like a necklace of cold stars. Sabrina felt it the moment the tires hit the metal grating, a pull, sharp and sudden, originating somewhere in the center of her chest, not the bond, which was severed and cooling, but the scar tissue of it. the remnant nerve endings firing one last time in response to her crossing out of his territory. And through those remnants, unmistakably, she felt him. Sabrina. Not a word, exactly. More like a frequency. His voice translated into sensation, pressing into her mind with the specific, unstoppable weight of an alpha's command. Come back. She gripped the door handle. Her vision swam for a moment with the sheer force of it. He's in my head, she said through her teeth. I know. Ephraim kept his eyes on the road. He is an alpha king, and you are just across his border. The command is biological. But remember what you are, Sabrina. Your blood is older than his authority. Push back. Come back. Louder now, threaded with something that was not purely command, something that felt like grief and desperation, and the ragged edge of pride crumbling. Please. That word, please, was almost her undoing. Because it was real. She knew it was real. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She found the cold, purposeful thing that had replaced the grief in her chest inside Richmond Hall, and she let it fill her up from the bottom. I belong to myself, she said quietly, and I am going forward. She pressed back. Mentally, but deliberately, the way you push a door closed against wind, not with anger, just with steady, committed force. The connection snapped. The silence that followed was ringing and absolute. The car crossed the midpoint of the bridge, the heavy, pressing atmosphere of the pack hierarchy, that constant biological weight that Sabrina had lived inside every day of her life without realizing it was a weight, lifted away like a hand releasing her shoulder. She breathed. She breathed like she hadn't breathed in years. Chicago at 3 a.m. was a city that didn't acknowledge night as a reason to stop. From the window of the small private plane, Sabrina watched it approach, a grid of light so dense it looked like a circuit board, or like the inside of something alive. 8 million people living their lives below her, or not one of them aware of pack hierarchy or alpha commands, or the particular grief of a severed bond. Something in her chest loosened. Just slightly. Just enough. The private terminal was quiet. A car was waiting. By the time they were moving through the city streets, the sky was beginning to soften toward dawn, the deep black going grey at the edges. Ephraim had provided a change of clothes on the plane. Dark trousers, a simple blouse, a coat that fit. She had changed in the small lavatory, folding her jeans and sweater into the bag, and had looked at herself in the mirror above the sink for a long, honest moment. The girl in the cracked mirror at the cottage had been holding herself together, out of habit and practice. The woman looking back at her now was doing something slightly different. She was not holding herself together. She was simply together. The distinction was small, but it was real. The building was the tallest she had ever stood beneath. A tower of glass and steel that caught the first thin light of the morning and held it. The lobby was all white marble and clean lines, staffed at this hour by a single security guard who looked at Ephraim's credentials and directed them without ceremony to the upper elevator bank. Helix Global, Sabrina said, reading the name above the elevator doors. I know this company. Most packs do, Ephraim said, though they prefer not to discuss it. She knew it because every wolf with any awareness of how the pack infrastructure actually functioned knew it. Helix Global manufactured the security systems that guarded pack territory perimeters. They produced the medical technology that pack healers depended on. While their financial instruments underwrote a significant portion of the Northern Pack's debt infrastructure. She had thought of them as a distant, human-adjacent corporation that the Packs used at arm's length and pretended not to need. The elevator rose in silence. Your father, Ephraim said, believes that the Pack's greatest strategic weakness is their contempt for the human world. They fight over territory in the forests, while the real power moves through fiber optic cables and trading floors. The elevator doors opened on the 91st floor. The office that occupied the top of Helix Global's headquarters was not what she had expected. She had been preparing herself for something aggressively corporate. Glass and chrome and the performance of power. What she found instead was a room that felt lived in, bookshelves that were actually used, a desk with papers on it, the smell of wood smoke from a fireplace against the far wall, real wood burning, impossible in a building like this, and yet undeniably present, and a man standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows with his back to her, looking out at the city as the dawn came in. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than she remembered, or perhaps she was remembering wrong. She had been a child the last time she saw him clearly, and children often miscalibrate the physical size of the people they love. His hair was the same dark shade as hers, threaded through now with grey at the temples. He wore a navy suit that had been made for him. He didn't turn around immediately. "They say," he said, and his voice was a rich baritone that resonated in the walls of the room and in some older part of her memory simultaneously, that a wolf who leaves the pack dies of loneliness. He turned. Isaac Mills looked at his daughter across the width of the room with eyes that were not the brown of a standard pack healer, not the gold of an alpha. They were a deep, clear amber that carried 4 years of grief and resolve in equal measure. He looked well. He looked strong. He looked like a man who had made a terrible choice for good reasons, and had spent every day since trying to build something worthy of it. Sabrina stood very still. Every version of this reunion she had rehearsed in her head over the years. The anger, the tears, the collapse into relief. All of it was somewhere behind her. What she felt, standing here, was something quieter and more complicated than any of those. "You left me," she said. Her voice was even. "I scrubbed floors. I was the daughter of a criminal. I took every piece of it on my back, alone, for 4 years. And you were here." Isaac didn't flinch. He had clearly been waiting for exactly this. "Yes," he said simply. "I was here, and I was wrong to have let it go on as long as it did. But let me tell you why, and then you can decide what to do with it." She nodded once. She sat down in the chair nearest the fireplace because her legs were genuinely tired, and because sitting down felt like a way of saying that she was prepared to listen without it meaning that she had forgiven anything yet. Isaac talked for nearly an hour. He laid it out with the precision of a man who had organized this information 1,000 times in his own mind, and finally had the person who needed to hear it in front of him. The payments he had found, the manufactured border incidents, the Haskins family's strategy, spanning 2 decades, to position themselves as the only viable political alliance for the Northern throne. The frame-up, when he had gotten too close. The choice he had been given, disappear completely, or watch his daughter become a target. "You were 16, he said. "Headstrong and brilliant, and you loved your wolf with your whole chest. If I had told you what was happening, you would have tried to fight it." "I would have," Sabrina said. "And they would have destroyed you before you were old enough to understand the terrain." He met her eyes. "I chose wrong by doing it alone. But I didn't choose wrong by trying to protect you." A long silence passed between them, filled by the sound of the fire and the city 30 floors below. Sabrina looked at the flames for a while. "Tell me about the bloodline." Isaac leaned forward. Something changed in his expression, the grief settling back, something older and fiercer coming forward. He pulled a small device from his desk drawer and activated it. A holographic display rose between them, a double helix, one strand glowing in a deep amber that was different from the standard representation. "We are called, in the very old records, the Still Water Line," he said. "The name is descriptive. Still water runs deep. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't perform its power. He looked at her steadily. You have been presenting as a low-rank wolf your entire life. You thought you were simply quiet. You were not quiet. You were concealed. The bloodline conceals itself instinctively in low-threat environments. It's a survival mechanism that goes back further than the current pack structure. The Alpha Command, Sabrina said slowly. Doesn't function on the still water line, Isaac confirmed. Never has. You can resist it. You always could. You simply had no reason to demonstrate that until tonight. Sabrina thought about Marmon's face in the moment before the wall came down. The warmth and the relief, and then the fear. He knew, she said quietly. Not consciously, but his wolf knew. An alpha cannot mate with a creature that outranks him unless he submits to the match rather than commanding it, Isaac said. Marmon Richmond has never submitted to anything in his life. His wolf felt the still water blood and understood it as a threat rather than a compliment, because that is the limit of what he currently knows. He paused. He rejected you out of fear, Sabrina, not contempt. I know, she said. I saw it. Another silence. Then Sabrina straightened in her chair and looked at her father directly. You said you built something. I did. Show me. Isaac stood and pressed a second control on his desk. The hologram shifted. The DNA strand replaced by a financial network map, lines of connection branching outward from the helix global central node like roots from a tree. Supply chains, infrastructure contracts, security systems, medical networks, every thread leading back to a company that the Northern Packs relied on completely and discussed as little as possible. I own the infrastructure your pack depends on, Isaac said. I have for 2 years. Quietly. Through holdings they don't connect to the mill's name. He looked at his daughter. I have been waiting for the right moment to use it. And tonight was the right moment. Tonight was the beginning of it. He extended his hand. Not as a father asking forgiveness, as a partner offering collaboration. I cannot do the rest of this alone. And the rest of this requires someone who has stood in that hall. Someone they have already underestimated. Sabrina looked at his hand. She thought of the ivory dress. She thought of Kerry Doolin's practiced cruelty. She thought of Marmon's amber eyes, the warmth in them, the fear, the wall. She thought of the 30 seconds she had given herself in the parking lot, and the decision she had made when the time ran out. She was not taking her father's hand out of anger. She was taking it out of clarity. She reached forward. Then tell me, she said, where do we start? The Northern Pack territory, in the months following the grand harvest ceremony, experienced a winter that simply refused to end. It was not poetic. It was practical and measurable and deeply alarming. The grain shipments from the Southern Distribution Network, which had always arrived with the reliable punctuality of a decades-old contract, stopped. Not all at once, but in increments. First the winter supplement shipments, then the spring reserve, then a communication from the distribution center explaining, with language so bureaucratic it was almost impressive, that due to a change in contractor alignment, the northern account would require renegotiation, or the security systems along the territory's eastern perimeter, sophisticated systems, Helix Global Systems, renewed on a rolling contract that had never previously caused a problem, began to malfunction. Sensors going dark for hours at a time, gates failing to register authorized entries, the eastern border, which had been the site of manufactured incidents for years, now had genuine vulnerabilities that the Pack's own enforcers could not adequately cover. And the king was not himself. Marmon Richmond stood in his war room at 8 in the morning, 6 months after the grand harvest ceremony, in front of a tactical map lit up with more red indicators than he had ever seen on it in his entire reign. He looked like a man who had been carved from stone and then left out in bad weather. The darkness under his eyes had the permanence of something that was not going away with sleep. His cheekbones pressed too close to the surface of his face. He moved through the days of his reign with the mechanical precision of a man who had built his habits carefully enough that they could carry him even when he himself was not fully present. And they did carry him, just barely, through council sessions and territorial disputes, and the endless administrative demands of running a pack of this size. But Bess Voss, who had been his beta for 6 years and knew him better than most, saw what the court did not. He was diminishing. "The Eastern supplier has issued another delay notice," Bess said, setting a folder on the war table beside him. Her voice was careful and even, as it always was when delivering information she knew he wouldn't like. 3 weeks on the medical inventory. The council is requesting an emergency session. "The council can request what they like," Marmon said. "And Kerry Doolin's father has sent another letter regarding the mating timeline." Bess paused. "Kerry is pressing her case through the social calendar. She has managed to place herself at 4 of the last 6 formal dinners." Marmon said nothing. He looked at the red indicators on the map. "There is also a communication from Helix Global," Bess added, "regarding the debt restructuring negotiations. They have agreed to a meeting, but they will not come here." She set the relevant document in front of him. "They want you in Chicago." Marmon looked at the document. The Helix Global logo at the top, that stylized double helix, caught the light. "They want the king to go to them. They hold the contracts, sir." Bess said it gently, but without cushioning it further, because she knew he needed the unvarnished version. "Technically, yes." Marmon picked up the document. He read it once. He set it down. "Prepare the jet," he said. "We leave Thursday." He left the war room and walked down the corridor toward his private study, and Bess did not follow, because she recognized the particular quality of his need to be alone. In the study, the fire was already laid. His desk was clear, except for a single item, a glass set to one side that had been there for 6 months, a stemmed glass, the kind used for elegant occasions, still holding a trace of dried ring from a drink that had never been finished. He didn't know why he kept it. He had told himself, in the first weeks, that it was simply that no one had thought to clear it, or then it was that he kept forgetting to tell someone to clear it. Now it had been 6 months, and the truth was simpler and harder than either excuse. He sat down at his desk. He looked at the glass for a while. Every night, in the hours between whatever kept him working late and the thin, restless sleep that eventually came, he reached for the bond and found the same thing he always found: silence. Not absence. He had never been good at distinguishing between those two words before this year, but he understood the difference now. Absence is nothing. Silence is the shape of something that was. He dreamed of ivory, sometimes, of the back of a curtsy, the pearl buttons he had counted without meaning to, of the way her voice had sounded when it did not shake. He closed his eyes. He pressed his fingertips against his sternum where the void lived. "Prepare the jet," he had said. He was going to Chicago to renegotiate a debt. That was what he told himself. That was the frame he put around it, because the other frame, that some part of him had felt the jolt in his chest when he saw the name on the document, and had not been entirely surprised, was a frame he was not ready to hold up to the light. In Chicago, on the same Thursday evening, Sabrina Mills was standing at the window of her office on the 43rd floor of Helix Global's headquarters, looking out at the lake. It was not the 91st floor. That was her father's space. Her office was lower, more central to the operational work, with a view that was all water and light and the particular grey-green of Lake Michigan in early spring. She preferred it. Or the 91st floor was where you went to see everything at once. The 43rd floor was where you went to think. She was thinking now. Ralph Hobbs knocked on the open door. Ralph was her father's right hand, a quiet, competent man in his 50s, with the sort of organized mind that could hold 12 problems in parallel without losing thread of any of them. He had become, over the past 6 months, something between a mentor and a colleague, and a reluctant friend. He brought her information and left his opinions on the doorstep unless she asked for them, which she had come to value enormously. The confirmation came through, he said. Thursday. He's bringing his beta and 2 advisors. They've requested the standard boardroom on the 41st floor. Give them the 91st, Sabrina said. Ralph paused. Your father's floor. To my floor now, she said. Give them the 91st. The view from up there has a particular effect on people who have only ever looked down at things. Ralph made a note. You'll be the lead. Yes. He doesn't know it's you. No. She turned from the window. He thinks he's meeting the VP of operations. Which you are. Which I am. She picked up the contract from her desk, the one she had been working on for 3 weeks, redrafting particular clauses in the small hours of the morning, checking and rechecking the legal architecture. Make sure the boardroom is set correctly. 1 chair on each side of the table. Nothing else. Ralph took the file she offered him and turned to go. Ralph. He stopped. The terms in Clause 4. The one about the Queen of the Nobility. Yes? Make sure it's in the final draft. Exactly as written. He looked at her for a moment. He had read the clause. He understood what it was for. Understood, he said quietly, and left. Sabrina turned back to the window. The lake was darkening as the light went. She put one hand flat against the glass, felt the cold of it through her palm, and let herself, for exactly 30 seconds, think about amber eyes and the warmth she had seen in them before the wall came down. 30 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. In the Northern Territory, in a cottage that was no longer occupied, a handwritten note from Leah Finch sat on a cleared windowsill, forwarded through 4 addresses and 6 weeks of transit to finally reach a P.O. box in Chicago that fed into a courier service that delivered it, 3 days later, onto the 43rd floor of a building in a city Leah had never been to. I don't know what you're doing, the note said, in Leah's handwriting, that turned slightly upward on the right side of every line. But whatever it is, don't stop. The pack misses its herbalist, but I think you might be busy being something else. Come back when you're ready. Tea will be waiting. Sabrina read it at her desk during a lunch she was eating while reviewing contracts. She laughed out loud. Genuinely, completely, the kind of laugh that surprises you. She pinned the note to the wall above her desk, between a financial projection chart and a map of the Northern Territory's supply chain nodes. It stayed there for the rest of the 6 months. She looked at it every morning when she sat down to work. New Chicago received Alpha King Marmon Richmond the way Chicago received everyone, with total indifference. The motorcade moved through the streets without pedestrians stopping to look or traffic organizing itself respectfully. A city of nearly 3 million people going about its Thursday afternoon entirely unconcerned with the presence of the most powerful supernatural ruler in the Northern Hemisphere. Marmon sat in the back of the lead vehicle and looked out at it. He had been to the human world before, rarely, briefly, always with the faint sense that he was visiting a place that operated by rules he hadn't been taught. Today the indifference settled over him differently, lighter somehow. The absence of the hierarchy pressure, the biological weight of being the apex of a social structure. Out here, there was no apex, but there was just a city. He was surprised to find he didn't hate it. "We arrive in 4 minutes," Bess said from the front seat. "The lead contact's name?" "The documentation lists a VP of Operations." Bess checked her device. No name given on the official correspondence. Standard Helix practice, apparently. Senior staff operate under company title until a meeting is confirmed. Marmon looked back out the window. "I need the debt restructured to a 12-year repayment with a 3-year grace period on the security contracts. That's an ambitious opening position. I'm an ambitious king." He paused, "and I have very little left to lose in terms of dignity. So I may as well be ambitious." Bess, who had the good grace to say nothing to that, said nothing. No, the Helix Global lobby was white marble and clean angles, a space designed to communicate precision and permanence. Marmon walked into it in his best suit, flanked by Bess and 2 senior advisors, and went directly to the reception desk. "Alpha King Marmon Richmond," he said. "Here to see the VP of Operations for the debt restructuring meeting." The receptionist, a young man with a tablet who did not stand up or adjust his posture in any way that acknowledged the title, typed something, looked at his screen and said, "91st floor, the elevator bank on the right. You're expected." Marmon took the elevator on the right. The ride up was quiet. His advisors reviewed documents. Bess stood with her hands clasped. Marmon watched the floor numbers rise and worked at keeping his expression neutral, because something had been happening in his chest since approximately 4 minutes into the drive from the airport. A low, insistent sensation he had been telling himself was general anxiety about the meeting, and it was getting harder to categorize it as that. The doors opened on the 91st floor. A wide, quiet corridor. Floor-to-ceiling windows along one side, showing the grey expanse of Lake Michigan. At the end of the corridor, a set of frosted glass double doors. Marmon pushed them open. The boardroom was long and spare. Black table, 2 chairs, 1 on each side. One wall was entirely glass, facing north, showing the city grid and the lake beyond in the pale afternoon light. At the far end, facing away from him and toward the view, sat a figure in a high-backed leather chair. "I expected to speak with a senior executive," Marmon said. His voice filled the room easily, out of habit. "You are," the figure said. The chair turned. Marmon Richmond was a man who had built significant portions of his life around the idea that he was not susceptible to being destabilized. He had sat in war rooms with bad news arriving from multiple directions simultaneously, and kept his face and his voice level. He had negotiated with alphas who were trying to take his territory, and showed no more external reaction than if he were discussing weather. He was, by any reasonable measure, a man of exceptional composure. The composure went somewhere when the chair turned. He had been telling himself, for 6 months, that the specific sensation in his chest was grief and regret, and the lingering biological consequence of a severed bond. All real things, but manageable things, or things that would eventually metabolize into something he could work around. He had built an entire internal architecture around the idea that what he felt in Richmond Hall was primarily a biological process that he had handled incorrectly and would eventually resolve. The woman sitting in the chair across the boardroom table from him was not something he could work around. She was wearing white, a sharp, precise suit that had nothing in common with an ivory dress, except in the way that a sword has something in common with a candle. Her hair was cut close to her face, clean lines. Her lips were a deep red. She sat with her hands folded on the file in front of her, and she was looking at him with the calm, assessing expression of someone who had been expecting him and had used the waiting time productively. She smelled of lake water and something warm underneath it, cedar, rain, and beneath that, beneath everything she had built on top of it, she smelled like herself, like the bond, like the thing he had been reaching for in the dark for 6 months. His wolf crashed forward against his ribs like something breaking through a door. He took an involuntary step toward her before he understood he was doing it. "Sabrina," he said. "Ms. Mills," she corrected. Her voice was even. "Or VP of Operations, if you prefer the formal version." She gestured to the chair on the opposite side of the table. "Please sit. We have a significant amount of material to cover." Marmon didn't sit. He stood at his end of the table and looked at her, and tried to reconcile the girl in the ivory dress with the woman in the white suit, and found that the reconciliation was easier than it should have been, because the essential thing, the quality of stillness, the particular quality of attention in her eyes, was exactly the same. She hadn't changed. She had expanded. "You are running Helix," he said. "My father is the CEO," she said. "I run operations, including the Distressed Assets Division." She tapped the file in front of her. "Which is you." A flash of something moved through him. Not the old alpha reflex. Not quite. Something more complicated than that, laced with a feeling he did not have a clean name for. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Pax," he said, "and you are 3 months behind on your security contract payments, and currently dependent on Helix infrastructure for 62% of your territorial defense systems." She opened the file. "Which makes you a distressed asset. The title doesn't change the numbers, Marmon." "Your Majesty," he said, automatically. She looked at him steadily. She did not repeat the correction. She simply waited. He sat down. She walked him through the numbers with the same calm precision she brought to everything. The debt figures, the infrastructure dependencies, the specific, documented ways that the Northern Pax continued function was threaded through contracts that Helix Global now held outright. She did not dramatize it. She did not perform triumph. She simply laid out the facts in the order that made them most comprehensible, and she did it with the manner of a professional who had done this many times and expected clarity over theatre. Marmon listened. He followed the numbers, but he was a competent enough administrator to understand exactly what she was showing him, and a self-aware enough person to understand what it meant that she was the one showing it to him. She had done this. In 6 months, she had built this. From his wolf's cottage on the edge of the territory, no rank, no protection, no political value, she had done this. "Why," he said, when she paused between sections. She looked up from the file. "The numbers or the—" "This," he said. "All of it. Is this revenge?" Something moved across her face. Quick and then gone. "Revenge is petty," she said. "This is correction." She set her pen down. "You told me I had no political value. I'm demonstrating that you were mistaken. Sabrina. Ms. Mills. I made a—" He stopped. Started again. His voice, which had not wavered in 6 months of deterioration and sleeplessness and loss, had the particular quality now of something trying to hold a shape it wasn't entirely sure of. The Council was pressuring me. The border incidents made the war risk feel. "I know about the border incidents," she said quietly. He stopped. "I know they were manufactured," she said. "I know who manufactured them. And I know you made the decision you made because you were being lied to by people who needed you afraid." She met his eyes directly. "That does not mean the decision was right. It means you were used. There is a difference, and it matters. But it does not change what that night cost." The silence between them had a texture, 6 months of texture. "What do I need to do?" he said. She slid the contract across the table. He read it carefully. She waited, without filling the silence. The terms were genuinely generous on the debt, restructured over a long repayment period, with an immediate restoration of the security grid and grain shipments. The exchange was significant. Mineral rights, a council seat, transferred to a Helix-appointed governor. But the pack would survive. The pack would be stable. Then he reached clause 4. He read it twice. He looked up at her. "You want me to marry Kerry Doolin," he said. "To maintain pack stability, the king must take a queen from the established northern nobility within 60 days of the contract signing," she said. "It stabilizes the pack magic. The council will accept it. It ends the political uncertainty that has been weakening the hierarchy since I rejected my fated mate in front of 200 witnesses," he said flatly. She didn't answer. "Is this what you want?" he asked. His voice had dropped. The question was not administrative. "Truly? Is this what you want?" She held his gaze without looking away. Her expression was composed and precise, and contained something underneath it that she had clearly decided not to show him. "I want you to sign the contract," she said. "Your pack needs it." Marmon looked at the pen on the table. He looked at the contract. He looked at the woman sitting across from him, at the white suit and the sharp line of her jaw and the red of her lips, and the thing he could not stop feeling at the base of his sternum that was not the void, not quite, but was absolutely related to it. He picked up the pen. He signed. He pressed hard enough that the tip snapped. He stood. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the handle. He did not turn around. "If I do this," he said to the door, "if I marry her, and the bond scars over permanently, is that what you want?" From behind him, he heard Sabrina's voice. It had lost, just slightly, the precision it had carried all afternoon. "Goodbye, Marmon," she said. He opened the door and left. Sabrina sat in the empty boardroom for a long time after his footsteps faded. The lake was darkening outside the window. The city grid below was coming on, the lights beginning to fill in as the afternoon light died. She pressed her hand flat on the signed contract and took 3 slow, complete breaths. Then she pressed the intercom. "Dad." A pause. He signed. Her father's voice came through, quiet and steady. "Good. Phase 1 is complete." A brief silence. "Are you all right?" She looked at the contract under her hand. At the clause, she had written herself at 2 in the morning, knowing what it would cost her to write it, and knowing what it would cost him to sign it. She had written clause 4 because Kerry Doolin needed to believe she had won. Because a person who believes they have won stops being careful. And Kerry Doolin, not being careful, was the only condition under which the thing Sabrina actually needed would become possible. 2 weeks, Isaac said through the intercom. "Then we finish it." "I know," she said. She looked at his signature on the contract one more time, the way it pressed into the paper, deep and irrevocable, the evidence of a man who had signed something he didn't want to sign, and done it anyway, because his people needed him to. For the first time since the grand harvest ceremony, Sabrina felt something in her chest that was not grief and was not cold determination. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but it was there. Richmond Hall was dressed for a wedding it didn't believe in. Fresh flowers had been brought in from the southern territories, arranged in great arching sprays of white along the ceremonial aisle. The crystal chandeliers, repaired since the night of the grand harvest ceremony, the replaced panels only slightly different in refraction if you knew where to look, were lit to full capacity. Every seat was filled. Alphas from the southern, eastern, and western packs sat in the front rows, their formal dress immaculate, and their expressions carefully neutral in the way that very old wolves have learned to be neutral when they sense that something unusual is about to occur. The unusual thing they were sensing was not yet defined, but it was present. It was in the air, in the specific quality of the silence before the processional, in the way Bess Voss stood at the edge of the ceremonial space, with her hands clasped a little too tightly. King Marmon Richmond stood at the altar in the ceremonial gold sash of his reign. He had worn it before, at territorial ceremonies, and high council proceedings, and the half-dozen formal occasions, a year where tradition required the full regalia. It had always felt like clothing, heavy, symbolic, appropriate. Today it felt like a chain, warm metal, unarguable. He had not slept in 3 days, not because of logistical ceremony preparations, though those had been constant, because the bond, the void that he carried like a bruise on the inside of his chest, had been doing something in the past 2 weeks that it had not done in the preceding 6 months. It had been sending signals, not words, not images, just a low, insistent frequency, like a current running through a wire, informing the wire that power was nearby. He kept telling himself it was the pack magic responding to the upcoming ceremony. He kept almost convincing himself. He looked at the back doors of the hall. He was not sure, later, how long he stood there, watching those doors before Kerry Doolin came down the aisle. She was magnificent. There was no other word for the visual composition she had assembled. Cascading white lace, a veil that moved like water, to diamonds at her throat that threw small points of light across the faces of the assembled nobility. She had been preparing for this moment for years, and the preparation showed in every detail. She reached the altar. She looked up at Marmon with eyes that were warm and triumphant in equal measure. "You look handsome, my king," she murmured. He said nothing. He was looking at the back doors. The high priest raised his hands and began. "We are gathered here, under the eyes of the moon, to unite these 2 bloodlines in service of the northern." I object. It was not a shout. It was not theatrical. It was a clear, measured statement, projected by a voice that had learned, in 6 months of boardrooms and hard conversations, exactly how to carry weight without raising volume. The back doors of Richmond Hall swung open. Miss Sabrina Mills stood in the opening. She wore midnight blue velvet, dark as deep water, embroidered in silver thread that caught the candlelight and held it. A crown of woven obsidian and moonstone sat in her hair, and she wore it the way she wore everything now, not as performance, but as simple fact. Behind her stood Ralph Hobbs, Ephraim Turlow, and a team in dark tactical gear, armed. Present not as aggression, but as a statement about the nature of the evening. The hall went very still. The stillness was different from the stillness of the grand harvest ceremony. That had been the stillness of shock. 200 wolves watching something unexpected and not yet understanding it. This was the stillness of recognition. Something ancient had walked through those doors, and the biological animal in every wolf in the room knew it before the conscious mind caught up. Kerry Doolin's composure lasted approximately 4 seconds. "Guards," she said, her voice sharpening to something that had nothing to do with the warm performance she had been maintaining. "She's a rogue. She has no rights here. Remove her." Not a single guard moved. "Stand down." Sabrina's voice was calm. She raised her left hand, and a projection activated from the device on her wrist, rising above the altar, filling the space above the assembled nobility with clear, sharp footage from a hidden camera. The footage showed Kerry Doolin in a private meeting room, 3 months ago by the timestamp. And across from her sat a man in nondescript clothing, who anyone familiar with the Northern Territory's rogue network would have recognized as one of Dermin Cross's eastern intermediaries. On the table between them, a sealed document and a transfer authorization. "The border incidents need to continue through the summer," the recording of Kerry said. Her voice was precise and unbothered. "He needs to feel the pressure is external. The moment he thinks it's under control, he stops needing what we're offering. Maintain the instability. And the medical supply delays. Make those look like infrastructure, not interference." The hall was entirely silent. "She is also," Sabrina continued, walking down the aisle as she spoke, the sea of nobility parting around her the way it had always parted for her, reluctantly, to inevitably, responsible for the framing of Isaac Mills 4 years ago. The documentation is in the supplementary file your counsel will receive this evening. The payments, the planted evidence, the arrangement with the Border Council recorder who altered the investigation report. She reached the front of the hall. She stopped. She looked at Kerry Doolin. The reason every wolf in this room can smell the fear on you right now is because guilt has a scent. And yours has been present in this territory for 4 years. Kerry's face had gone through several transitions during this. First cold calculation, then controlled fury, then the thing that lived underneath both of those, which was the expression of someone whose carefully constructed world is being removed one foundation stone at a time. "It's fabricated," Kerry said. Her voice was still controlled, but the edges were fraying. "She's using human technology to make something from nothing. She has motive, she has resources, If it is fabricated," Sabrina said quietly, "then your scent would tell a different story." Silence. Every alpha in the front row was watching Kerry. Every wolf in the room could smell what was happening. The biological truth of it, broadcasting without permission, without the ability to be scripted or managed or performed away. Kerry's control broke in a single, total instant. She shifted mid-movement, fast and violent, the wolf tearing through the white lace of her wedding gown, and launched herself toward Sabrina's throat. She crossed half the distance before two things happened simultaneously. Marmon moved. His body was between Sabrina and Kerry before his conscious mind had completed the decision. Instinct, older than rank or strategy or any of the architecture he had built his identity around. The protective instinct of a wolf placing himself between the thing that matters most and the thing that threatens it. But Sabrina had already stepped aside. She had been expecting this. She had positioned herself exactly right for it. There was a single, sharp sound, small, precise, and Kerry Doolin crumpled to the floor with a silver-laced round in her shoulder. Not fatal. Never fatal. Sabrina's aim had been exact. Kerry shifted back into human form, clutching her shoulder, her white lace shredded and her performance entirely dismantled. Sabrina lowered the small firearm and looked at the assembled hall. "Take her to the council holding facility." "No," she said. "Not to any specific guard. To the room. She'll need medical attention and legal counsel, in that order." Two of Marmon's enforcers, Bess having already given them a look that communicated everything necessary, moved forward and escorted a screaming, weeping Kerry Doolin out of Richmond Hall. The great doors closed behind her. The void vanished. Marmon felt it go the way you feel fever break. A sudden, total lifting of something that had been pressing down for so long you'd stopped consciously registering its weight. In its place, rushing back with the force of something that had been damned for 6 months, came warmth, recognition, the bond, which had been severed and scarred and reached for in the dark every night for half a year, snapping back into place like a key finding its lock. His knees went, not from weakness, but from the weight of what had just been restored. He dropped to both knees in the center of the aisle, in front of the alphas of 3 territories and the full assembled pack nobility and the crystal chandeliers and the God he sometimes forgot he believed in. His head was bowed. His hands were open at his sides. He stayed there for a long moment. Then he looked up at Sabrina. "I rejected you," he said. His voice was not a king's voice right now. It was a man's voice, stripped to its actual material. "I stood in this hall and I used your father's name against you, and I told you that you had nothing worth keeping, and I did it in front of witnesses because I was afraid." He held her gaze. "I was afraid of what you made me feel, and I wrapped that fear in the language of responsibility, and I have spent 6 months understanding exactly what that makes me." Sabrina looked down at him. She was quiet for a moment. Her expression had the quality it always had, that particular stillness, that quality of seeing too much and choosing carefully what to do with it. "You were afraid," she said. "Yes." "I was a coward," he said. "You were a man who had never encountered something he couldn't outrank," she said. "It is not a good excuse. But it is an accurate one." She tilted her head slightly. "And you are currently on your knees in front of your entire pack nobility, which suggests that you are learning." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. The expression of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is being offered, cautiously, the possibility of setting it down. "I am trying," he said. "I know," she said. She reached down. She took his hand. He stood. He kissed her. Not gently. Not diplomatically. Not in the measured, composed manner of a king performing a symbolic gesture for an audience. He kissed her the way a man kisses someone after 6 months of reaching into silence, 6 months of waking up, reaching for something that wasn't there, 6 months of a void in his chest that he had pretended was exhaustion and called fatigue, and refused to name correctly until this moment. She kissed him back the same way. The pack magic did not gradually stabilize. It settled all at once, like a building that has been slightly off its foundations for months, and suddenly, cleanly, finds the ground. Every wolf in the hall felt it, in their bones, in the back of their skulls, or in the particular biological way that pack wolves feel the health of their hierarchy. Something had been wrong for 6 months, and had just become right again, and the relief of it moved through the room in a single wave. When they broke apart, Marmon looked at her crown. He was breathing harder than he would admit later, and there was a particular brightness in his eyes that was not entirely composed. "Are you the queen of the northern packs?" he said. "Or am I simply the husband of the VP of operations?" Sabrina laughed. The sound filled Richmond Hall, warm and real, and nothing like anything this hall had heard at a formal occasion in living memory. It was the laugh of a woman who had stopped performing, long before she stopped standing in rooms that expected her to. "Read Clause 7 of the contract you signed," she said, taking his hand. "Or we are partners, equal in every governance decision, every territorial matter, every council seat." "I signed away my sovereignty," he said. "You signed into a partnership," she corrected. "There is a difference, though I understand if it takes you a moment to feel it." He looked at her. She looked back at him. Around them, the hall was beginning to recover its sound. The alphas in the front row exchanging words, the nobility murmuring, the high priest standing to one side with the patient expression of a man who has witnessed unusual ceremonies and understood that history was occurring. "Sabrina," Marmon said. "Yes? I would like, very much, to not waste any more time." She squeezed his hand. "Then stop talking and walk with me." They walked out of Richmond Hall together, hand in hand, into the morning. But the spring had finally arrived in the Northern Territory. The snow that had refused to leave for 6 months was retreating, pulling back from the stone steps of the hall, uncovering the first pale green of new growth in the courtyard garden. The air smelled of cold water and thawed earth, and the particular, clean smell of a season that has finally been allowed to begin. Sabrina stopped at the top of the steps and looked back once. Through the open doors, she could see the crystal chandeliers still burning, the white flowers on the ceremonial aisle, the hall where a girl in an ivory dress had stood 6 months ago and decided not to break. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she faced forward. "My father is going to be very pleased with himself," she said. "Or your father arranged an elaborate multi-stage plan that involved faking his own death, building a corporate empire, and engineering the exposure of a conspiracy that went back 20 years, Marmon said. "He has probably earned some amount of self-satisfaction." "Don't tell him that," she said. "He will be absolutely insufferable." Marmon's mouth curved. It was the first genuine, uncomplicated smile she had seen from him, unguarded, reaching his eyes, making him look, for a moment, like the man she had glimpsed for 30 seconds in the ballroom before the wall came down. She decided she liked him better without the wall. She suspected that was going to be true for the rest of her life. Somewhere in Chicago, on the 91st floor of Helix Global Headquarters, Isaac Mills stood at the window with his second cup of coffee and looked out at the city. His tablet was showing him the live news feed from the Northern Territory, where reporters were beginning to gather outside Richmond Hall in response to an anonymous tip about unprecedented events at what was supposed to be a royal wedding. Ralph Hobbs appeared in the doorway. "She called?" Isaac asked. 3 minutes ago." Ralph leaned against the doorframe. "She sounded well." "She is well," Isaac said. He watched the city for a moment. He thought about a girl in a cracked mirror room, fastening her own buttons in the dark, going into a place that had never been kind to her, and finding, at the end of it, that she was made of something that place could not diminish. "Phase 2, Ralph said. "The council restructuring, the Eastern Territory negotiations." "Ralph," Isaac said. "Yes?" "Give her a week." Ralph considered this. 1 week. "She has been working since she was 16, Isaac said. "She can have 1 week." He set down his coffee cup and picked up his phone to call his daughter, and for the first time in 4 years, Isaac Mills called his daughter just to hear her voice. In the Northern Territory, as the spring morning fully arrived, and the last of the winter snow pulled back from the steps of Richmond Hall, Sabrina Mills walked forward. Not away from something, this time. Toward something. She had walked into that hall with her mother's dress and her father's disgraced name, and 30 years of being told she was worth exactly as much as the people above her decided she was. Or she had walked out of it 6 months later, with nothing but the cold certainty of a woman who had stopped asking for permission to exist. And now she walked forward with a kingdom to rebuild, a father to forgive on a longer timeline, a partner who was learning, genuinely, visibly, with the humility of a man who had looked at his own fear and named it correctly, and a life that looked nothing like the life she had been assigned. She had not won the king. She had built something worth having, and then she had decided, with full information and both eyes open, to let him into it. That was different. That was better. That was hers. And that is the story of Sabrina Mills, the girl the pack called invisible, who turned silence into strategy, rejection into resolve, and absence into architecture. She didn't need saving. She just needed time, and she used every single second of it. If this story moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath in that hall, or exhaling on that bridge, or feeling something settle in your chest when the bond came home, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want to know what happens in the council restructuring, in the Eastern Territory negotiations, in the first year of a partnership between the most powerful werewolf king in the north and the woman who bought his debt and decided he was worth the investment, come back. There is more.